The chalk appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was that soft gray color that promises rain but never delivers. I was in the kitchen washing a single coffee mug when I heard the scrape of something against the hardwood floor. Not a crash or a thud, just a steady deliberate sound like a pencil moving across paper but heavier. I dried my hands on my jeans and walked toward the noise. My daughter sat cross-legged in the middle of the hallway, her back straight, her focus absolute. In her hand she held a piece of white sidewalk chalk, the kind we bought last summer for drawing hopscotch on the driveway. Now she was using it on our floor. A line stretched from one wall to the other, clean and bright against the warm brown wood. It was not a scribble or a child's messy mark, it was straight with purpose, each end touching the baseboards perfectly. She did not look up when I stopped beside her. Her tongue peeked slightly from the corner of her mouth, the way it always did when she concentrated hard on something important. I stood there watching her finish the line with a final firm stroke. She placed the chalk neatly beside her knee and finally lifted her eyes to mine. "This is my line," she said. Her voice was calm, not challenging, not angry, just stating a fact like the sky is blue or water is wet. I smiled because that is what parents do when children do unexpected things. We smile first and think later. "What kind of line is it?" I asked, kneeling down to her level. "The kind you do not cross," she answered simply. I reached out and gently touched the chalk with my fingertip. A fine white powder came away on my skin. "It is just chalk," I said, "it will wash right off." She shook her head slowly. "It is not about the chalk," she said, "it is about the line." I studied her face, searching for the joke, the pretend game, the make-believe moment that would dissolve in laughter. But there was none. Her eyes held mine steady and clear. "This is where my space begins," she explained, "and where yours ends." I felt something shift inside me, then a small quiet movement like a stone settling deeper in water. I had crossed lines before with her, of course, every parent does. The line of a closed bedroom door when she was 3 and needed privacy to change clothes. The line of a whispered secret she asked me not to share with her other parent. The line of a bad dream at midnight when she pushed my hand away after I rubbed her back too long. But those lines were soft, blurry things made of mood and moment. This line was different. It had edges. It had weight. It had been drawn with intention. "May I cross it?" I asked. She considered this for a long time, longer than any 7-year-old should have to consider such a question. Then she nodded once. "Just this time," she said, "to tuck me in tonight." I smiled again, a real smile this time, not the automatic one. "Of course," I said. I stood up and without thinking I stepped over the white mark, my foot hovering for a second above it before landing softly on the other side. She watched my movement carefully, as if memorizing the arc of my leg, the placement of my foot. Then she smiled too, a small private smile that did not reach her eyes. That night, after bath time and stories and 3 requests for water, I came to her room to tuck her in. The chalk line was still there, glowing faintly in the nightlight's amber glow. I stepped over it again, this time with more awareness. I pulled her blanket up to her chin, kissed her forehead and whispered good night. She was already pretending to sleep, her breathing too regular. I stepped back over the line before turning off her lamp. In the days that followed, the line remained. It did not get smudged or stepped on accidentally. People simply stepped over it. Her other parent stepped over it to retrieve a stray sock. The family dog stepped over it without noticing. Visitors stepped over it after a quick explanation: "This is her line." No one questioned it. No one laughed. The line became part of our home, like the scuff mark on the door frame from the vacuum cleaner or the slightly loose floorboard in the living room. But I noticed something else. My daughter began drawing other lines. A line of stuffed animals arranged precisely along the edge of her bed, separating the sleeping space from the floor. A line of books standing upright on her desk dividing school things from art things. A line of pebbles collected from the park arranged in a curve across the backyard separating the grass from the flower bed. She was mapping her world. Defining where things belonged. Creating order from chaos. And I understood then that the chalk line was not about keeping me out. It was about her learning to build a self. A self with edges and boundaries and territories that belonged only to her. One afternoon about a week after the line appeared, I found her sitting beside it again. This time she held an eraser, not the chalk. "Are you going to erase it?" I asked, sitting on the floor a respectful distance away. She shook her head. "I am just thinking," she said. "About what?" "About whether lines should be permanent or temporary." I waited, letting her thoughts unfold at their own pace. "Sometimes," she said, "lines need to move. Like when you grow taller and your clothes do not fit anymore. The line has to move to make room." I nodded, understanding dawning slowly. "So this line might move someday." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe it will stay. But it is my line to move. Not yours." Her words settled between us, simple and profound. I felt a strange mixture of pride and loss. Pride that she was learning to claim her space. Loss because I knew with certainty that the days of stepping freely into every part of her world were ending. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, like daylight fading in autumn. Each day a little less light, a little more shadow. That evening I made a decision. I would not cross her line again unless invited. It was a small thing, a tiny gesture in the grand scheme of parenting. But it felt important. The next morning I stopped at the edge of the chalk mark before entering the hallway. I called her name softly. She appeared at her bedroom door. "Can I come in?" I asked, nodding toward the line. She considered me for a moment, then nodded back. "You may." I stepped over carefully, placing my feet with intention. "Thank you," I said. She shrugged, but I saw the corners of her mouth lift slightly. That small exchange changed something between us. The line was no longer just her declaration. It had become our agreement. A silent contract about respect and space and love that did not require constant physical proof. Weeks passed. The chalk line faded, slowly, worn down by careful footsteps and the natural oils from bare feet. But no one suggested washing it away. We all stepped around it or over it with the same care one might give a sleeping animal. One Saturday morning I woke early to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching the water trace paths down the glass. My daughter wandered in, wearing mismatched socks and her favorite oversized sweater. She poured a glass of orange juice and sat across from me. "The chalk line is almost gone," she said, not looking at me. I nodded. "I know. Do you want me to draw a new one?" I thought about this, sipping my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my hands. "No," I said, "I think the first one did its job." She looked up, then her eyes meeting mine fully. "What job?" "It taught me to ask before I cross," she said, finishing my thought. I smiled. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, watching the rain. "Lines are not walls," she said softly. "No," I agreed, "lines are just lines. They show us where to pay attention." She nodded as if this was the exact answer she had been waiting to hear. That afternoon the rain stopped, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. My daughter went outside barefoot to feel the damp grass. I watched from the window as she walked to the edge of the yard where her pebble line still curved through the soil. She knelt down and gently rearranged one of the stones, moving it just an inch to the left. Then she stood and walked back toward the house. When she reached the back door, she paused on the threshold. She looked at me through the glass. I opened the door. Before stepping inside, she pointed to the space between us. This is a line too, she said. I nodded. I know. She stepped over the threshold into the house. I did not move to hug her or touch her shoulder. I just stood there and let her enter on her own terms. She walked past me toward the kitchen for a snack. But halfway there she stopped, turned and walked back to where I still stood. She wrapped her arms around my waist and pressed her cheek against my shirt for exactly 3 heartbeats, then she pulled away and continued toward the kitchen without a word. I stood there for a long time feeling the ghost of her hug on my skin. The chalk line on the floor had nearly disappeared, now just a faint ghost of white near the baseboards. But I no longer needed to see it to know it was there. Some lines are drawn in chalk. Some in words. Some in silence. And some in the space between a question and an answer. Between a step forward and a step back. Between a child learning to build walls and a parent learning to respect them. That was the first crossing. Not the last. But the first one that mattered. The first time I understood that love sometimes means stopping at the edge. And waiting. And listening. And honoring the quiet courage it takes to draw a line in the first place. The line did not disappear all at once. It faded slowly like a photograph left in the sun. By the time my daughter turned 14, the chalk was gone completely, not even a ghost of white remained on the floorboards. But the line was still there. It had simply changed form. It was no longer something you could see with your eyes. It lived in the space between us now, in the half-second pause before she answered a question, in the way she angled her body when I entered a room, in the quiet click of her bedroom door closing, not locked but closed with intention. At 7 the line had been an invitation. At 14 it was a warning. I did not notice the shift right away. Parents rarely do. We move through our children's lives like ships passing in fog, believing the waters are still navigable long after the channels have changed. One evening I walked into her room without knocking. It was habit more than anything else. I had been walking into that room for 14 years to pick up discarded clothes, to return a library book, to check if she was sleeping when the house grew too quiet. This time she sat at her desk, headphones on, staring at her computer screen. She did not hear me approach. I reached out to touch her shoulder, a gentle tap to let her know I was there. She jumped. Her whole body flinched away from my hand as if I had burned her. The headphones slipped from one ear and she spun around in her chair. Her eyes were wide, not with fear exactly, but with something sharper, something that looked like betrayal. "Do not do that," she said, her voice low and tight. I pulled my hand back as if stung. "Sorry," I said, "I did not mean to startle you." She turned back to her screen without answering. The conversation was over. But something had broken in that moment. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure what to do. Finally I bent down and picked up a crumpled t-shirt from the floor. "I'll put this in the laundry," I said to the back of her head. She gave a single short nod. I left the room and closed the door behind me. In the hallway I leaned against the wall and took a slow breath. That was when I understood. The chalk line had been simple. This new line was complicated. It had no clear edges, no visible markers. It shifted with her moods, with the time of day, with things I could not see or understand. Some days I could cross it easily. She would emerge from her room laughing, telling me about a funny video she had watched, or asking if we could order pizza for dinner. Other days the line was a wall. She would answer questions with one word, avoid eye contact, disappear into her room the moment she walked through the front door. I kept crossing anyway. Not out of disrespect but out of habit and worry. Laundry still needed washing. Meals still needed planning. Homework still needed checking. I told myself these things were necessary. But necessity became an excuse. I entered her room to put away clean clothes when she was not there. I read over her shoulder while she did algebra problems. I asked questions about her friends, her classes, her day, filling the silence with my voice because silence felt like failure. Each crossing left a mark. Not on the floor but on her face. A tightening around her mouth. A flicker in her eyes. A slow retreat into herself. One afternoon I found her journal on the kitchen table. It was open to a page filled with looping handwriting. I did not mean to read it. But my eyes caught a phrase at the bottom of the page. I wish they would just ask. My heart stopped. I closed the journal immediately and pushed it toward the center of the table. But those 4 words stayed with me. I wish they would just ask. That night I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about all the lines I had crossed that day. I had entered her room to drop off a basket of laundry. I had read a text message on her phone when she left it charging in the living room. I had commented on her outfit before she left for school, something about the color not matching her shoes. Small things. Ordinary things. Things I had done 1,000 times before. But now they felt different. Heavy. I realized I had stopped seeing the line because it was no longer drawn in chalk. But it was still there. Stronger than ever. The next morning I made a decision. I would start knocking. It seemed like such a small thing. Just 2 taps of my knuckles against wood. But it felt monumental. Like learning a new language. Like rebuilding a bridge I had unknowingly burned. That afternoon I stood outside her closed door. My hand hovered in the air. For a moment I hesitated. What if she thought it was strange? What if she asked why I was suddenly treating her like a guest in our own home? But I knocked anyway. 2 soft taps. A pause. "Come in," she called. I opened the door slowly. She looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her face. I held up the basket of clean laundry. "I can leave this by the door if you want," I said. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, not a big smile but a real one that reached her eyes. "You can put it on the bed," she said. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. That single act of knocking changed something, not everything. But something. Over the next few weeks I practiced. I knocked before entering her room. I asked before hugging her. I waited for permission before sitting beside her on the couch. It felt awkward at first. Stilted. Like dancing with someone you barely know. But gradually it became natural. And something else happened too. She started opening up again. Not all at once. Not in dramatic confessions. But in small ways. She left her bedroom door open more often. She shared snippets of her day without being asked. She asked me questions about my life, my childhood, my dreams. The line had not disappeared. But it had become a doorway instead of a wall. One evening I found her sitting on the back steps watching the sunset. I stood in the doorway for a moment watching her. The way the golden light caught the edges of her hair. The way she wrapped her arms around her knees. She looked so grown up and so young all at once. "Can I join you?" I asked from the doorway. She glanced over her shoulder and nodded. I sat beside her on the cool concrete. We watched the sky change from orange to purple to deep blue. No one spoke. The silence was comfortable, not heavy. After a while she sighed softly. "Remember when I drew that chalk line?" she asked. I smiled. "I remember. Do you ever think about it?" "All the time," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I drew it because I needed to know I could have my own space," she said, "and I needed to know you would respect it." I looked at her profile, the curve of her cheek, the thoughtful set of her mouth. "I know," I said. Do you think I was mean for drawing it? No, I said, I think you were brave. She turned to me, then her eyes searching my face. You stepped over it that night, she said, to tuck me in. I nodded. You said I could. I know, she said, but you could have just left it there, you could have pretended not to see it. But you saw it? I saw it, I agreed. She looked back at the darkening sky. I'm glad you saw it. Me too. We sat there until the first stars appeared. Then she stood up, brushing off her jeans. I'm going to make popcorn, she said. You want some? Yes, please, I said. She started toward the kitchen, then paused and looked back at me. You know, she said, the line is still there. I nodded. I know. But it's different now. Yes, I said, it is. She smiled. Good night, she said. Good night, I answered. She went inside and I stayed on the steps for a few more minutes, breathing in the cool night air. The line had changed again. It was no longer about keeping people out. It was about choosing who to let in. And when. And how. That was the lesson of part 2. Lines do not vanish as children grow. They transform. They deepen. They become more complex. The chalk line of childhood gives way to the invisible lines of adolescence, lines drawn in silence and sighs, in closed doors and open hearts. And the job of a parent is not to ignore those lines, or to bulldoze through them in the name of love, but to learn their new shape, to honor their presence, to wait for an invitation before crossing. That evening, as I washed the popcorn bowl in the sink, I thought about all the lines in our house. The one between childhood and growing up. The one between dependence and independence. The one between holding on and letting go. None of them were drawn in chalk anymore. But they were all still there. Waiting to be seen. Waiting to be respected. Waiting for the moment when crossing them would mean something different entirely. Something final. Something necessary. But that moment was not yet. For now there was still time to learn. To listen. To knock before entering. To step back when needed. To love without trespassing. That was enough. For now it was enough. Part 3. The argument. The line changed again when she turned 16. It was no longer quiet or patient. It had teeth now. It had a voice. And one Tuesday evening that voice broke through the surface of our ordinary life like a storm after weeks of still air. It started with a tablet left on the kitchen counter. She had been using it to watch videos while eating a late snack, then rushed upstairs to finish homework. The screen glowed softly on the wood. A message notification pulsed at the top. Without thinking, I glanced at it. Just a flick of my eyes. A parent's reflex born from years of vigilance. Who was texting this late? Was she safe? Was she okay? The message was from a friend, just a silly joke about a teacher, nothing dangerous, nothing alarming. But my eyes had crossed the line. I did not touch the tablet. I did not read further. I simply looked. And in that moment my daughter came back downstairs for a glass of water. She saw me standing there. She saw my eyes on her screen. Something in her face collapsed, then hardened all at once. You looked, she said. It was not a question. It was an accusation wrapped in ice. I opened my mouth to explain. It was an accident, I was just. Do not say it was an accident, she cut me off, her voice rising, not loud but sharp, like glass breaking slowly. I did not move, I did not defend myself. I just stood there, feeling the weight of what I had done. You always do this, she said, her hands trembling at her sides. Always. I crossed the line again and again, she continued, each word precise and painful. You read my texts when I leave my phone charging. You go through my backpack looking for permission slips you say, but really you are looking for other things. You listen outside my door when my friends are over. You act like you are protecting me, but you are just invading. Her words landed one after another, not as attacks but as truths I had been refusing to see. I tried to speak again. I only want to keep you safe. Safe, she repeated the word like it was foreign to her. Do you know what makes me feel unsafe? I waited. When the person who is supposed to respect me the most keeps ignoring my boundaries, she said, her voice cracking now. That is what makes me feel unsafe. Not strangers, not the internet, not the world outside. You. The word hung between us heavy and true. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to argue. I wanted to list all the dangers I worried about, all the stories I had read, all the fears that kept me awake at night. But I stayed silent. Because I knew she was right. The line had been there all along. Not in chalk, not in words, but in the space between her trust and my fear. And I had been trampling it daily. Justifying each crossing with love. But love does not require trespassing. Real love requires respect. You crossed it again, she whispered, her anger draining away, leaving only exhaustion behind. You always cross it? I looked at her, really looked. At the dark circles under her eyes from late night studying. At the way she held her shoulders tight like she was carrying something heavy. At the flicker of disappointment in her gaze, not anger anymore, just sadness. A deep, quiet sadness that hurt more than any shout could have. I am sorry, I said, the words simple and bare. No excuses, no explanations. Just sorry. She did not accept it right away. She just stood there, breathing slowly in and out. After a long moment she walked to the sink, poured her glass of water and drank it steadily. When she turned back to me, her face was calm again. Not happy, not forgiving, just calm. I need you to understand something, she said. I am not a secret to be uncovered. I am not a problem to be solved. I am a person. And persons have boundaries. I nodded. I understand. Do you? She asked, not challenging, just asking. Yes, I said, and for the first time I meant it with my whole self. Not just my words but my actions, my habits, my instincts. I will do better, I promised. She studied my face, searching for sincerity. Then she gave a small nod. Okay. She took her water and walked back upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen long after she was gone. The tablet still glowed on the counter. I did not touch it again. I left it there until she came down later to put it away herself. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed replaying every boundary I had crossed, not just with her but throughout my life. The times I had ignored my own parents' lines when I was young. The times I had pushed past a friend's discomfort because I thought I knew better. The times I had mistaken control for care. We do this so easily as parents. We wrap our fears in the language of love. We say I am doing this because I love you, when really we mean I am doing this because I am afraid. Afraid of losing them. Afraid of not knowing. Afraid of the growing distance between who they were and who they are becoming. But fear is not love. And protection without respect is just control wearing a kinder name. The next morning I made breakfast earlier than usual. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit. I set the table carefully, folding the napkins the way she liked. When she came downstairs she paused in the doorway, surprised. You did not have to do this, she said. I know, I answered. I wanted to. She sat down and we ate together in comfortable silence. No questions about her plans for the day. No comments about her outfit or her hair. Just eggs and toast and quiet companionship. When she finished she pushed her plate away and looked at me. Thank you, she said. You are welcome. Another pause. About last night, she began. You do not have to. I need to, she interrupted gently. I was not just angry, I was hurt. Because I keep telling you where the line is and you keep stepping over it like it is not real. I know, I said. I see it now. Do you? She asked again, the same question as before but softer this time. Yes, I said, I see it. And I will not cross it again without asking. She nodded slowly. Asking is the important part, she said. Not permission necessarily, but acknowledgement. Just let me know you see the line before you cross it. That is all I have ever wanted. That simple. That difficult. That necessary. We cleared the dishes together, working side by side at the sink. The morning sun streamed through the window, warming our backs. In that ordinary moment something shifted between us. Not fixed, not perfect, but shifted. The line was still there. But now we both saw it clearly. And seeing it together made it less of a barrier and more of a bridge. A bridge built on respect instead of fear. That afternoon I went into her room to return a book she had lent me weeks ago. I stopped at the doorway. My hand lifted automatically to knock. But I paused. I realized I had been about to knock out of habit, not out of true intention. So I lowered my hand. I stood there for a full minute just breathing. Then I raised my hand again and knocked 2 soft, deliberate taps. Come in, she called. I entered and placed the book on her desk. Thank you for lending this to me, I said. She looked up from her homework and smiled. Did you like it? I did. I turned to leave but stopped at the threshold. Can I ask you something, I said. She nodded. Why did you draw the chalk line when you were 7? She thought for a moment, her pen tapping softly against her notebook. I think, she said, I needed to know I existed as my own person. Not just as your daughter but as me. And I needed to know you would see me. Not just the idea of me but the real me, with my own space, my own thoughts, my own lines. I nodded, understanding unfolding in my chest like a flower opening slowly in sunlight. Thank you for telling me, I said. Thank you for listening, she answered. I left her room and closed the door softly behind me. In the hallway I leaned against the wall for a moment. The argument had not been pleasant. It had been painful, necessary, raw. But it had cleared the air between us. Like a thunderstorm washing the dust from leaves. After the storm everything is cleaner, sharper, more alive. That evening as I washed dishes I thought about lines again. How they are not walls. How they are not punishments. How they are simply maps of the soul. Showing where one person ends and another begins. And how crossing those lines without consent is not love. It is erasure, but honoring them. That is the deepest form of love. The kind that says, I see you. I respect you. I will not try to own you. Even though I love you more than anything. That was the lesson of part 3. Sometimes the line must be drawn in anger. Sometimes it must be defended with sharp words and tears. Because gentle lines get ignored. Quiet boundaries get trampled. And until the crossing causes pain, the crosser may never see the line at all. The argument was not a failure. It was a necessary breaking. Like a bone that must be reset before it can heal properly. We broke that night. But in breaking we found a truer shape for our love. One with edges. One with respect. One with space to breathe. And in that space, real connection could finally grow. Part 4. The crossing. The line had been quiet for months. It lived in our home like a familiar guest, no longer demanding attention but always present. We had found a rhythm after the argument. I knocked before entering rooms. I asked before reading messages left on screens. I waited for embraces instead of initiating them. She responded with small openings, a shared meme sent to my phone, a question about my day, a laugh that reached her eyes again. The line was no longer a battlefield. It had become a threshold we both honored. But thresholds are meant to be crossed sometimes. Just not without consent. Last Tuesday morning arrived like any other. Gray light filtering through bedroom blinds. The hum of the refrigerator starting up downstairs. The distant sound of a garbage truck on our street. I woke early, my body moving through familiar motions, shower, dress, pack a lunch. But something sat heavy in my chest, a knowing I could not name. She was leaving soon. Not forever, but for a long time. College acceptance letters had arrived weeks ago. Decisions were made. Dates were marked on the calendar. August loomed like a horizon line separating one life from another. I had been preparing for months, buying storage bins, researching dorm essentials, making mental lists of things to teach her before she went. How to unclog a sink. How to sew a button. How to call a doctor when sick. Practical things. But none of that mattered in that quiet morning hour. What mattered was the space between us. The line we had drawn and defended and learned to honor together. And the understanding growing inside me that soon there would be no need for crossing at all. She would be gone. And the line would dissolve into memory. I finished my coffee and stood to leave for work. She was already in the kitchen eating toast at the table, her hair still damp from the shower. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Morning," I answered. I stood by the door slipping on my shoes. The ritual was familiar. I would say goodbye, she would offer a wave or a nod, or sometimes nothing at all, absorbed in her phone or thoughts. But that morning I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back to look at her. Really look, at the curve of her shoulder under a soft sweater. At the way she held her toast with both hands like she had when she was small. At the concentration in her face as she scrolled through her phone. This might be the last ordinary morning, I thought. Not the last forever, but the last before everything changed. The last before distance became the new line between us. A line no amount of knocking could cross. I walked back into the kitchen slowly. She glanced up, sensing my movement. "You forgot something?" she asked. "No," I said, I stopped. "I just wanted to hug you before I go." Her eyes softened slightly. She set her phone down on the table face down. A small gesture but significant. She did not stand up. She just waited. And in that waiting I saw the invitation. The last crossing. I stepped forward. My arms opened and I wrapped them around her shoulders from behind. She was stiff at first, not resistant but cautious, the way she had been since the chalk line days. Then she softened. Just for a breath. Just for 3 heartbeats. Her head tilted back slightly against my shoulder. And in that moment I felt everything. The weight of her as a newborn in my arms. The sticky hands of toddlerhood. The fierce hugs of elementary school. The reluctant side hugs of middle school. The careful distance of high school. All of it folded into this single embrace. This last crossing before the stepping back. I breathed in the scent of her shampoo, coconut, and something else, something uniquely her. I memorized the feel of her shoulder blades under my hands. I held her not as a parent claiming a child, but as one person honoring another. Then I let go. I stepped back. Not dramatically, not with tears or speeches. Just a quiet retreat to my side of the line. She turned to look at me then. Her eyes were clear and steady. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome," I answered. I stood there for another moment, not moving, not speaking. Then I turned and walked to the door again. This time I did not pause. I stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sun was just breaking through the clouds, painting the street gold. I walked to my car and got inside. But I did not start the engine right away. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. And I made a promise to myself. That would be the last uninvited crossing. Not because she was leaving, but because she had earned her space completely. And I had learned my place within it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, emails, deadlines. Ordinary work things. But my mind kept returning to that kitchen moment. The weight of her in my arms. The softening. The stepping back. When I returned home that evening, the house was quiet. She was in her room, door open slightly, music playing softly inside. I stood at the top of the stairs listening. Not to the music but to the silence between notes. The space where she existed separate from me. I walked to her doorway and stopped. I did not knock, I just stood there, visible in her periphery. After a moment she looked up from her desk. "You are home," she said. "I am." I held up a brown paper bag. "Brought takeout from that place you like." Her face lit up slightly. "You did not have to." "I know." I set the bag on her desk beside her laptop. As I turned to leave, she spoke again. "Wait." I stopped and turned back. "Thank you," she said again. But this time it was different. Deeper. I nodded. "No need to thank me." "Yes," she said, "there is." "For what?" "For knowing when to step back." I felt something loosen in my chest. I had spent years believing love meant constant presence. Constant checking. Constant crossing. But she had taught me otherwise. Love means seeing the line. And respecting it even when it hurts to stay on your side. Especially then. That evening we ate together at the kitchen table. No phones, no distractions, just food and conversation. She talked about a project she was finishing. I talked about a problem at work I was trying to solve. Ordinary things. But the space between us felt different. Lighter. More honest. After dinner she cleared the plates and I made tea. We sat on the couch side by side, not touching but close. The television played some show neither of us was really watching. After a while she spoke softly. "I am scared," she said. I turned to look at her. "About college?" "I know," I said. "Not just that. About everything. About being on my own. About making mistakes. About you not being there to fix things." I let her words settle in the room. I did not rush to reassure her. I did not say everything will be fine. Because it might not be. And she deserved honesty more than comfort. "It is okay to be scared," I said finally. "I am scared too." "You are?" "Of letting you go." She was quiet for a long time. Then she shifted on the couch, turning to face me. "You are not letting me go," she said. "You are letting me grow. There is a difference." I felt tears press against my eyes, but I did not let them fall. "Yes," I said, "there is." She reached out then and took my hand. Just for a moment. Just long enough to squeeze once. Then she let go and settled back against the cushions. We sat like that until the show ended. Until the kitchen clock ticked past 10. Until the weight of the day settled softly around us. Later, as I brushed my teeth before bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The lines on my face seemed deeper somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing them clearly for the first time. Each one a record of worry and joy. Of sleepless nights and laughter. Of crossing lines and stepping back. Of learning slowly how to love without holding too tight. I turned off the light and walked down the hall to my room, passing her door on the way. It was closed but not locked. A sliver of light visible underneath. I paused for just a second. Not to listen. Not to check. Just to acknowledge the presence behind the door. The person she had become. The person I had helped shape but never owned. Then I continued to my room, and closed my own door. That night I dreamed of chalk lines stretching across fields under open sky. Lines that did not divide but connected. Lines that children drew and adults honored. Lines that faded with rain but were redrawn with intention. When I woke the next morning, the dream lingered like a soft light behind my eyes. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. She joined me a few minutes later, hair messy, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," she mumbled, pouring cereal into a bowl. "Morning," I answered. We ate in comfortable silence. When she finished, she carried her bowl to the sink and rinsed it. Then she turned to me. "I am going to the library later," she said. "Want me to bring anything back for you?" "No thank you," I said, "but I appreciate you asking." She nodded and headed toward the stairs. At the bottom step she paused and looked back. "About yesterday morning," she said. "Yes. Thank you for the hug." "You are welcome." She studied my face for a moment. "You stepped back after." "I did." "I liked that," she said. "Me too." She turned and walked up the stairs, her footsteps light on the wood. I sat at the table for a long time after she left. The morning sun warming my back through the window. And I understood something fundamental in that quiet moment. The last crossing was not about goodbye. It was about completion. It was the final act of a long lesson in respect. The moment I crossed, not as a parent claiming territory but as a human being offering love with open hands and no expectation of return. And the stepping back. That was the real gift. The acknowledgement that she belonged to herself completely. That my job was never to keep her close, but to give her roots strong enough to grow her own wings. That was the crossing. Not the step forward, but the step back. The deliberate retreat that said, "I love you enough to let you be yours." The kitchen clock ticked softly on the wall. Somewhere upstairs a door closed gently. The house breathed around me, alive with memory and possibility. And I sat there in the center of it all. On my side of the line. Finally at peace with the space between us.